It's a team from Toronto, Canada. We, the North, are now we, the champions.
What is going on, Raptors Nation? It is Luca here, back with another Raptors Nation podcast. Hope you're all doing well. I am joined by a very special guest for this week's show. We got Ron Gutterman making his Raptors Nation podcast debut. Ron has been writing a lot of great articles over on RaptorsNation.com. Definitely go check out his work. And it is great to have Ron joining me for this. Ron, how's it going? How's life been treating you?
It's been great. I'm excited to make my debut on here. I've done a lot of work with the Lakers podcast and the Dodgers podcast with our company, but excited to be on our Raptors side here.
Do us a solid, guys. Hit a like on this video. Subscribe to the channel for more Raptors Nation podcasts. And of course, you can find this podcast wherever you get your favorite podcast. That is Apple, iTunes, or Spotify. So, Ron, before we dive into, the segments that we got planned for today, just let me know what your perspective has been of the Raptors as somebody who obviously is covering the team now. Did you expect the Raptors to take this route of rebuilding as they have and finally picking a direction?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a couple years of this, right? Of just deciding whether or not the Raptors were going to go this route. I think it was inevitable. The Siakam, OG Anunoby edition of the Raptors was kind of not having the success post Kawhi Leonard that the assumption was that they would. Even once they drafted Scotty Barnes and had some good, pieces around them, it never felt like things really came together. And so when that happens in the NBA, after a certain amount of years of trying that, you got to try something different. And I'm glad that they finally picked this direction, even if in my opinion, it was like a year and a half too late, but they finally picked a direction. I thought they got a pretty good haul for OG Anunoby on the player side and then Pascal Siakam on the pick side. So I think they set themselves up well to, maybe in a year or two, be a really solid contender in the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people just expected this team to finally pick a direction. It was only a matter of time of when. It's funny, when we were over in Vegas for Summer League, the big rumor at that time was that the Hawks were one of the biggest suitors for Siakam. There was that crazy trade buzz, and I remember I thought something was going to break as we were there, but kind of talks, went over, and the entire offseason played out. And yeah, that was kind of the uncertainty going into the season. They had a new head coach in Darko Rajakovic. They made moves that suggested that they still wanted to compete now, but the season kind of unraveled, fell apart, and at that point, it was clear as day. And Masai thankfully finally picked that direction, like you said, trading OG for a very good players package. And then Siakam, you hope they nail the picks, because that's the Siakam deal, right? If they nail at least one of those picks, it's going to be worth it. So we are officially in life in a rebuild when it comes to this Raptors team. And it is no surprise that at this point of the season, Ron, the Raptors, they are trying to lose a bunch of games. They are inevitably tanking and trying to keep their top 6 protected pick, because you go back to the Jakob Poeltl trade, the Raptors gave up a 2024 first-round pick, top 6 protected. Now, if the Raptors do finish within the top 6, they keep their pick, then they owe a future 2025 or 2026 pick to the Spurs, which again would be top 6 protected. But as we look at this season, the remainder of it, 14 games left, Raptors half a game back of the Memphis Grizzlies, just because Memphis has played one more game than them at this point. Do you think the Raptors will pass the Grizzlies? The Raptors have lost 7 in a row. It's the longest losing streak in all of the NBA, and 10 of their next 14 are against playoff teams, which includes the Sacramento Kings at the time of this recording tonight.
Yeah, I was looking ahead at their schedule. They got 2 against the Wizards and 2 against the Brooklyn Nets. And I think that's where the potential wins kind of end for this team. Just because, with all the injuries, this is just not the Raptors that, you're putting out guys that are at this point development projects. You're just trying to get through the season. And I think it's so vital that the Raptors keep their pick this year, because once those guys get back healthy, you are going to love the possibility of adding 2 first-round picks, a top 6 guy, and whatever the Pacers pick ends up being, probably in the teens. You would love the ability to add 2 first-round picks to your healthy core. If you lose the pick, and then if you lose the pick next year or the year after, it's fine, because you have that core and you've already added the 2 first-round picks. If you lose it this year, it's just kind of like it feels like it almost sets things back a little bit, even though that wasn't the place they expected to be in. But yeah, I look at it, the schedule, and I don't see, I mean, it's a lot of very, very good teams. It's the Timberwolves, it's the Thunder, it's the Bucks, it's pretty much all of the contending teams. And they'll have games against, a team like the Lakers, who are jockeying for positioning right now, and every win is going to matter for them. So yeah, I don't see a lot of wins for this Raptors team here. And I haven't looked too hard into the Grizzlies schedule. I imagine it's probably similar, but I have to believe the Raptors are just going to be motivated to get into that top 6.
Yeah, I agree with you. And you just look at the personnel, like you touched on. Raptors missing a bunch of key guys, 4 to their 5 starters. We don't know now how long Quickly's going to be out dealing with personal issues. RJ's out with personal issues. Scotty, Jakob, done for the season. Whereas you got the Grizzlies, they got Bane back. JJJ's playing in some games. So they just have much more talent at this point, where I can see them sneaking out a couple of wins. Whereas the Raptors, yeah, it's tough to find wins at this point. It's funny. I asked Matthew Valento, who was on the post game Sunday after the Raptors' latest loss, and I asked them over under 3 wins the rest of the season for the Raptors. You probably got to go under, because outside of those Wizards games, who I think are worse than the Raptors at this point, I don't know if the Raptors can beat the Nets even. I know, the Nets are having a bad season, but there's not many wins to come by. I wouldn't be surprised if the Raptors maybe get 2 more wins from here on out. So I agree with you, Ron, in terms of getting the pick this season, just because it comes at the end of a losing season. You want something at least to have after this disastrous season, which is on pace of being the worst Raptors season in over a decade. And I agree with the point that you made, whereas, like 2 years from now, this team could be in a way better position if guys blossom, core grows together, where it wouldn't hurt you as much to lose a 2025, 2026 first round pick, even though those drafts are projected to be a lot deeper than this one. So yeah, I mean, the Raptors' fate was kind of decided for them. This was a team that they came out of the All-Star break, winning 3 in a row. Everybody was like, okay, it's time to push for the play-in. Darko even said, we're focused on the play-in, trying to win. But then as soon as that Scotty Barnes injury happened, that basically derailed everything. And from that point on, it was clear as day, okay, it's time to pack it in and try to lose as many games as possible.
Yeah, and I think, it's always, even and you mentioned the point that future drafts are going to be deeper. This is not a very deep draft. This is not considered a very good draft. But losing the number 7 overall pick, if things fell exactly as they are right now, they would lose the 7th overall pick. That hurts no matter how good the draft is. Whereas even if this team just gets healthy, if this team is just at full strength with what they have right now, no additions, they're probably in the 13 to 16 range in terms of where they would draft. So next year, even in a deeper draft, I'm okay losing number 15, even if they make no other additions. It's even in a bad draft, losing number 7 hurts. That will hurt no matter what.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, the Raptors could do everything right from here on out, Ron, and they could still lose it, because it could come down to ping pong balls. If the Raptors finish with the 6th worst record, they still have a 46% chance of having a number 6 pick, which it's not over 50. So you still don't like your chances. So yeah, the Raptors have just put themselves in a tough position. And, it begs the question, and I'll get your take on this. Did they make a mistake trading for Jakob Poeltl a season ago? Masai Ujiri, he said in a press conference addressing the Siakam trade when it happened, he said he felt that he owed it to those guys of trying to go for it that season when the Raptors were in limbo, when me personally, I was calling for them to rebuild a season ago. You said you agree with that as well. They make the trade for Poeltl, and then they double down on it by, re-signing him to a 4-year deal this summer. Looking back at it in hindsight, was it a mistake, or can the Raptors still salvage and, make sense of why they traded for Poeltl? Because I will say this about Jakob Poeltl. He is a good player. The Raptors are better with him in the lineup. I mean, he is a good rim protector, but he's not that traditional stretch 5 that would benefit playing alongside a guy like Scotty Barnes.
Yeah, I think, if this team is at full strength, I think Jakob Poeltl is a good fit. But, I think the point you made about the rebuild probably should have happened a year ago. And I get Masai Ujiri. I get his point of, he had a really good personal relationship with Pascal Siakam and OG Anunoby. And I think he really felt like a personal connection. Like, not just we owe it to these guys as like players, because they're good. It's like he owed it to them as people because he had such a good relationship with them to make it work. And, sometimes even if you end up making some bad moves in the process, you can argue that it's never a bad thing to like support guys that helped you get where you are. And I think that was kind of just the good relationship that they had. So I think hindsight's 2020. Yeah, they probably shouldn't have made that trade because then you're guaranteed getting a pick this year. Yes, you don't have Pirtle, but you still have a really good host of players. We're going to talk about some draft guys later. There's some pretty good centers in this draft, two in particular, that you could have just had. Like if they have the number 7 overall pick in this draft, there's one center that I think would be a really good get for them and they wouldn't need Pirtle. But that's hindsight. I think it's hard to argue against the personal connection that Masai had with OG and Pascal Siakam.
Yeah, and it's a really good point there because Masai was clearly emotional, and especially with Siakam, it was one of those things where the personal side of it, he didn't want to trade him, but the business side of it, he knew he had to trade Siakam with how things were unraveling. So always tough to make decisions like that. We'll see if the Raptors ultimately pass the Grizzlies in the standings. I think they got a good chance of doing that, and we'll see if the ping pong balls are in favor of the Raptors and they do keep that pick at the end of this season. All right, switching gears now. Let's talk about the rest of the season. Ron, it's going to be tough, to zero in on these games when you know what the outcome is likely going to be. Raptors obviously shorthanded, but the other side of it is it does create an opportunity for the young players on this team, guys who are trying to impress the Raptors enough to keep a spot on this roster going into next season, or young players who are just trying to blossom and grow their game and earn more minutes and be a bigger part of the rotation going into next season. So outside of the core three of, Barnes, Barrett, Quickly, there's still a lot to figure out with this team. What are you looking forward to? Is there a player in particular who you're eyeing in the final stretch of this season to really make the most out of this opportunity to grow?
Yeah, I mean, I think the obvious answer is Grady Dick. He was the lottery pick from last year, and because of all the injuries, because of all the trades, he's finding himself with a way bigger role than I think was anticipated for him. And next year, when you go back to full strength and you have Quickly and you have Barrett and you have Scotty Barnes, Grady Dick is going to be lower on the depth chart than he is right now. And I think this is kind of a perfect opportunity for him to say, hey, let me blossom a little bit here. Let me see what I can do in these last 15, 14 games, because when it comes back to next season, I want to bring some of the tools that I learned when I was playing basically by myself. I want to bring that now to when I'm playing off the bench, when I'm playing with better players. What impact can I bring to this Raptors team?
Yeah, and you look at Grady Dick right now, he's arguably the number one option. I know there's still Gary Trent Jr. there, who's a regular starter, but he's going to be the number one option in these final 14 games. That's assuming if Quickly doesn't come back soon. So, yeah, can Grady, develop consistency? He did show a lot of good things since coming back when he had that second run with 905 when the Raptors put him through that workout program. You saw him be a lot more confident, coming off screens, hitting shots. He loved that corner three in particular. At one point, he was amongst the best in hitting the three in the corner. Last 3 games, he has struggled with his shot a little bit. And, this is a guy in Dick who, he has been starting now just with the whole situation with the Raptors missing key guys. So I am looking to see what Dick can do, because what's really interesting, Ron, is the fact that Grady Dick has a sample size now to give his best effort and show the Raptors, okay, like, hey, I can be a potential starter on this team, because Gary Trent Jr. is an unrestricted free agent this summer. So there's no guarantees he'll be back. So can Grady do enough to really sell himself as a future starter for this team, where the Raptors can look at the whole Gary Trent Jr. situation and say, okay, you know what? Grady's done enough. We believe in him. He's still so young, so raw, untapped potential that he can replace Gary Trent Jr. in his role. And it's funny because I wrote an article of Gary Trent Jr. taking Dick under his wing and being that role model for him. But it could be a classic example of, Dick overtaking Trent Jr. and being the starter of this team. Do you think Dick is capable of being a starter, or do you think it's way too soon to put that on him going into next season? And what do you think the Raptors do with Gary Trent Jr.?
Yeah, I think I think they're almost going to have to take the Trent Jr. situation and the Grady Dick situation separately. I think it's going to be hard for the Raptors at this point to justify saying, like, Gary, you can go elsewhere because we have Grady Dick here and we're comfortable here. I think they're going to have to take those two things separately. If they get Gary Trent Jr. to come back on a reasonable deal, then that's incredible. If not, I think then the way they adjust is probably, I think, at least for the time being, I don't see Grady Dick as like a regular starter on a team that's trying to win games just yet. But again, if he can take advantage of these last 15 games, I could see himself carving out maybe a sixth man shooter role off the bench. And, you know, he could contribute to winning basketball in that way when the Raptors are back to doing that next season.
Yeah, and like I said, he has started a lot of games recently, and he hasn't really looked like the player you would want to start every day, going through, you know, those ups and downs. And he still has a lot of maturing to do. And yeah, these 14 games are going to be vital for his growth. Another guy I'm looking forward to seeing how he finishes up here is Ochai Agbaji. That's another young piece that the Raptors got at the deadline in that trade that involved Kelly Olynyk, who the Raptors locked up to a 2-year deal a couple weeks ago. And you look at Agbaji, he's very young. He's going to be a part of this team's rotation. You know, I see him as a role player, somebody who they can count on from off the bench. I just want to see that, you know, that shooting get a lot better, because that was one of the reasons why he fell out of Utah's rotation. They gave up on him because, remember, the Jazz were relatively high on him. He does play solid defense. He could be a very good on-ball defender. We've seen glimpses of that, but it's that shooting that's really going to indicate, okay, can this guy be a playable rotation piece? So Agbaji, it's funny because like he had his first couple of games with the Raptors, he shot it well. There was a game against the Hawks. He had a couple threes made. He looked like the guy you wanted to see, but his shooting has fallen drastically. So can he get into a rhythm? Do you have faith in Agbaji to kind of find himself and be a good enough shooter where he could be, you know, a 3-and-D from off the bench the Raptors can count on in some nice bench minutes?
Yeah, I mean, I'm intrigued to see what the Raptors can do in the offseason with him. I think historically, the Raptors have done a better job developing young players than Utah. Not to say that Utah's bad at it. I just think Toronto is among the better in the league at developing young talent. So I think the Raptors are one of those teams that I would trust with a guy like Agbaji, just because he does have all the tools. And I think that's why the Jazz drafted him as high as they did, is they saw the tools existed and knew that it would take some work to put it together. And it hasn't quite come together yet, but those tools still exist. The defense has improved, and the three-point shooting has shown itself to be there in very small spurts. And if you can get that to any consistency at all, if you can get him to even be a 30% three-point shooter, like on the regular, I think he becomes a guy you can have as your 8th, 9th man in your rotation.
And just to piggyback off of that, do you like the Raptors? Did you like that Raptors move of bringing in Agbaji and Olynyk, surrendering a late first, which they basically banked on? Okay, we're hoping Agbaji becomes better than this guy we would have taken in this year's draft with that pick, which was a late first. And then they bring in Kelly Olynyk, who they did lock up, obviously hometown guy, and you need veterans in a rebuild. Were you a fan of that deal?
You know, I'm a fan of the deal if you end up keeping your top 6 overall pick. I think because it's hard to integrate 3 first-round picks into the fold in a single offseason. Teams don't often do it. They'll usually find their way to trade out of one of those picks. And if you do keep that pick, then you have 6, you have, let's say, 16 or 17, and then you have like 25, 26. I think that third one just kind of becomes expendable. And if you can develop Agbaji to be something, then great. Olynyk is obviously a piece that has continued interest. Like, he's always a guy that brings impactful basketball to a team. So I do think that was a good deal. I think it's an especially good deal if they keep the pick. If not, then I think it's more debatable, more 50-50. But I like we said earlier, I think the Raptors do end up in that 6th position. So.
Yeah, management already said that they were going to keep all their picks because, I mean, they could have had up to 4 in a draft, which is just sometimes a little bit too much and overwhelming where you see teams get rid of one. So the Raptors are betting that, yeah, Agbaji does pan out and they won't regret trading away that late first-round pick in this year's draft. Speaking of the draft, we're going to have a lot of content coming when it comes to this draft as it pertains to the Raptors, and we're going to begin it relatively early here, just touching on it to close out today's pod. Ron's been doing a lot of articles along with, Matthew speculating who the Raptors could take. There's been a lot of mock drafts that have come out, and they're going to continue to come out. March Madness is upon us beginning today and carrying out. So there's going to be a lot of time for Raptors fans to get familiar with some of these names that keep coming up. Ron, I know you've been following this draft class closely. Are there some draft targets that make sense for the Raptors when you look at their picks and assuming they are able to keep number 6?
Yeah, one guy I particularly like, he's kind of an unproven wing talent, but Kaishan George out of Miami. He's currently projected to go in like the early to mid-teens. So this is probably where they'd be with Indiana's pick, or if they wanted to move up, or if they wanted to move down from 6 for whatever reason in a trade, they could do that. But what I like about him for the Raptors specifically, he's a little unproven. He's a freshman, didn't get a ton of minutes with Miami, but the 3-and-D wing tools are there with this guy more than almost anyone in this draft. And I think one thing that has to be like learned about this draft class is it's going to be a lot of kind of shots in the dark. This is not a very deep draft class. This isn't even a class that has like a consensus number 1 pick. It's kind of a class that is just a lot of guys that have tools, and it's whether they can put those tools together. So that's going to be the theme of a lot of these guys. I think Kaishan George is someone that I think is a really good fit. If he does put together those tools, he could be a great guy next to Scotty Barnes. Masai Ujiri, I know, loves those versatile, rangy wings. This is that guy. I think he's a very Masai Ujiri pick. Another guy that I like is Tristan Da Silva out of Colorado. He is not on the athletic side, but he's a high IQ. He's a shooter, plays really good off-ball defense. And I think, again, in the modern NBA, if you have range, if you're a wing, if you can play off-ball defense, and if you can shoot the 3, you will have value. And so even though he's not the most athletic, I think he was compared to like a Kyle Anderson type. That's, I think, a type of guy that would fit super well on the Raptors. So I think those are 2 guys that I'm looking at. There's a lot of guys in the draft, but those are just 2 I wanted to focus on specifically.
Yeah, a name that keeps popping up too is Jacoby Walter from Baylor. That is a guy that has appeared in a lot of mock drafts with the Raptors taking with that Indiana Pacers pick. What about the early second rounder? That's an interesting one, because a name that keeps popping up, and this goes back to, are they going to end up taking a center because they have, Pirtle, and obviously they just re-signed Olynyk, is Zach Edey. So he's Canadian. The Raptors obviously have gone with the theme of getting Canadians to play for them because it seems like Canadians are motivated to play for their hometown team. We've seen that with RJ Barrett as of late. Do you like him if he's still on the board for the Raptors at, potentially 32, or is there another guy that the Raptors can take in that spot?
Yeah, I think Edey is probably a little slow for the NBA game. Like, that's my fear with him, is that he's a little slow for the NBA game. I do think he'll get drafted. I don't really particularly love him. I think, if they're going to go with the center, I think at that Pacers pick, I'd much rather take a look at a guy like Kel'el Ware with Indiana. He was with Oregon for a while. He had some question marks when he was with Oregon about like work ethic, motivation, all those weird things that like always get criticized in players when you remember they're like 17 years old. But he transferred to Indiana this year for, I think, his junior season. And he's been everything you'd want out of a center. And I think he's slated to go in that kind of late lottery to early 20s range. So like I was saying, like if you didn't have Pirtle, or if you were planning to move off of Pirtle, or even if you just wanted a serviceable back, Kel'el Ware is I probably a center I like the most in this draft. That's not in that top. There's a Donovan Clingan who is supposed to be in like the top 5 to 10 of this draft. I don't think the Raptors should be taking a center if they keep their top 6 pick. But otherwise, Kel'el Ware is probably my favorite big in this draft.
Where do you think this draft is going to rank? I've seen a lot of stuff that this is going to be the worst draft in a decade. Do you think that's unfair, or do you think this will be one of those drafts that will produce some hidden gems? I know it's tough to say, but in your opinion, your prediction, what do you think this draft is going to be known for? Being a big disappointment, or one that did produce some hidden gems?
I think I think this is going to be one of those drafts that if some guys hit, it will be a surprise, mainly because this is just not a draft that has a lot of like proven legitimate talent. And we're coming off of a draft that obviously had Victor Wembanyama and like a lot of really good players. And there's been a few good drafts in a row but the thing is, in every NBA draft, there will be hits. There will be guys that you don't expect that hit. There'll probably be some dude taken 23rd overall in this draft that becomes an all-star. Like that's how it always goes. But I think the expectation with this class is that there aren't any game changers. And that hasn't been the case for a little while in the NBA. Every draft has kind of had like, yeah, this guy's probably going to be a top 3 player on his team at some point in his career. This draft doesn't seem to have that, but you can never predict with these things. And that's why you just got to go with a guy that you feel has the tools with your development program to be what you need him to be.
Yeah, this is when the developmental teams need to be just locked in on these prospects, especially a team like the Raptors. They haven't hit outside of the Scotty Barnes pick in terms of getting like a hidden gem, end of the draft type of player that did pan out for them. So this is a draft where they can definitely get back on track and hit on one of those late firsts or, early second rounders that do produce and become a valuable rotation piece on this team. So we'll see if Masai Ujiri and company can pull off some magic again. Ron, I got to ask, have you filled out your bracket yet?
I've done, so I always do one like really serious one, and then I'll do like 3 or 4, just kind of like mess around, see what I can come up with. I've done my mess around brackets. I haven't done my serious one yet.
Okay, because I was going to put you on the spot and ask you for your final 4, but
yeah, I haven't done my serious final 4. So I could give you a final 4, but it's not my serious final 4.
Hey, what's your unserious final 4 and winner?
All right, let me find one real quick. I'm going to get it in 2 seconds. Just got to load up the the ESPN app here.
So March Madness is upon us, and I have not filled out my bracket yet, so I might steal some picks here.
This is a fun final 4. I got Auburn, Arizona, Kentucky, Texas.
Okay.
It's no 1 seeds, but it's a 2, a 3, a 4, and a 7. And yeah, I mean, once I put together my serious bracket, I'll have better answers. But that's just like a fun bracket that I did this morning because I was like, I want Auburn to win a chance. Like I was just trying to get Auburn to win because I think they're a good value pick. So I was like, what do I need to mess around with to make Auburn win the national championship?
Yeah, I feel like just these brackets in general, the less research you do and the more unserious you are with it, usually ends up being your better bracket. Yeah. So I would not be surprised if this unserious bracket does better than your other one.
Absolutely.
March Madness is upon us. I'm super excited to see how it goes down, but we are going to conclude today's show, guys. Let us know your thoughts on what you're looking forward to over the last 14 for the Toronto Raptors. Are there some draft names you are eyeing in on with this March Madness tournament? And also let us know if you think the Raptors are going to ultimately keep that number 6 pick. Ron, thank you so much for joining us. Where can the people find you and your work?
Yeah, I'm doing work with Raptors Nation. I'm doing I do a lot of writing and podcast work with Lakers Nation. I run my own site, Angels Nation. Do some work on the Dodgers side. I'm everywhere with this company. So anywhere you can find me, I'll be.
He's a busy man, and he gave us some time. Really appreciate that, Ron. And we'll definitely have him back for some shows, and we'll get him back closer to the NBA draft, as there'll be plenty of draft talk with this Raptors team. That is it for me, guys. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Hit a like, subscribe on your way out. Until next time, this is Lucas signing off. Stay safe.